All right, so in lab 7, we're kind of gonna do something a little bit new, and it may seem a little bit crazy. I don't know if any of you guys have looked forward at the instructions, but I'm gonna try and talk a little bit about the concepts because I actually already have another video out there that really goes over the lab step by step. So, kind of what I wanted to do is more talk about the logic that's happening here, because honestly that's probably the most confusing bit, is actually the actual logic of what we're trying to accomplish here. And then once you know what the logic is, and then most of the time you can make the code work the way that you want it to. So that's kind of what we're going to do a little bit, is in conjunction with a little bit of the instruction. We're going to talk just a little bit about theory, about the logic of what we're trying to do. So hopefully you can understand why we're doing it, and also what some of the shortcuts that are introduced in this week are, because this week kind of has this crazy query that we're going to write. um, but it's complex, but if you can understand it, you can get to where you can write it and you go into an interview and can pull something off like that, then they're gonna be pretty impressed. So it's there, and it's really good, and it's a nice shortcut that you'll, if you ever continue on into this field, you'll be so glad you learned, because you'll use it all the time and it saves you tons of time. So anyways, a real quick look at the instructions. So just so you know, where we're going with this. So lab 7, what it's all about is we are trying to build in the price portion of our database, because we've got to where we have people, we have rentals, but the one kind of thing that's missing from our database is price. We don't have any prices, and so we're going to add those. But in doing so, there's a couple things we need to do, and so that's kind of where I'm leading up to the logic behind all this, because there is a little bit of overhead that comes with pricing. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit. So um, let's get started with that. So let me get to a new spreadsheet here, and we will do some experimenting. So I always like to use, just to keep things a little bit more simple, at the beginning, I like to use like a grocery store is a good example, something we're all familiar with. Um, And so imagine if you're running a grocery store, right? And we have um, stuff. Now, naturally, and we're talking about prices here. Naturally, kind of what we always want to do is we want to put the item, like let's say bread lovers white loaf, right? And something like that. And then we put a price, and let's say it's $3.98, so on and so forth. And we could do this. Um, Dozen large eggs. Um, I don't know what a dozen large eggs costs. $1.98. 1 gallon whole milk. I know what that costs. It's like $2.65 here. So you get the picture, right? We have item and our price. Now, as you guys all know, there are sales, right? And so let's say we cut the price of this down to $2.40 for the weekend, right? Well, I think naturally we want to do this where we just jump in here and change the price. In fact, I kind of deal with this frequently at my work, with people who are non-technical. They rather than do it the way they should, they just like to change the data, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But can anyone tell me what the problem is if you just change this? Um, can you guys foresee any problems with just changing this versus maybe some other method? Um, Yeah, and it changes in all instances. That's perfect. And a good case is because let's say we have our items and our price over here, but then let's say we have our transaction over here. I'm just going to put transaction ID, and we're going to put let's add one column over here because now we're going to kind of database-ize this a little bit. Right. So let's say that our items are 1, 2, and 3. And then we have a transaction ID of 1, 2, and 3. And our items, let's say we just have 2 people order bread and 1 of milk. Now, what you can see is that just like Marie said, or David and Robert, pretty much everybody, is if you change it here, all of a sudden now that price has changed for everything here. And so come tax time, let's say we keep track of our transactions, or just the bank. We keep track of how much money we make. And so like just to keep things simple, let's say today we're a little grocery store. We made and I should have done whole numbers. What was I thinking? Let's say 4, 2, and 3. Right? So we have some items here. Let's say they ordered, let's see, so there was 4, 4, and a 3. So $11 is what we would put in the bank for that day. Now, let's say we change this, down to 2.5 and it just price drops. Well, when we go to do this and reconcile everything come tax time or whatever, there's going to be a discrepancy here. Right. And so, really, what we want to do is we want to track um, prices over time. And we want to be able to have an active price, but we want to historically save all of our prices. And that's essentially what we're doing in this lab is we're making it so we can do that. And the way we're going to do that without duplicating our data, because we could add the stuff right here in the item table, but then we're going to have to reinsert the name or duplicate the name multiple times. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another table and we're going to call it price. And it's going to have a foreign key to item ID. And then we're going to have a price. And then we're going to have an active flag. All right, so we put this in here. And then we can have our prices in here. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, and I'm missing one important thing. Let's add a start date and an end date. Because there is one thing that, well, and I'll talk about it. We're going to leave it like this for now. So let's say our item ID. So we're going to put this in here in our bread lover's loaf. Let's say it's $3 and it starts today. Item ID 2, our large dozen eggs, and it's $2 and it starts today. And then our gallon of whole milk is worth $2.50 and it starts today. Now let's say we're going to put our bread on sale for $2.50. And let's say we want to do that on the week of March 17th. Right. The nice thing is this way we can actually even predate stuff or whatever, but for this, and let's change this. Let's change this to, we'll just change it to the previous year. Let's say that we were a new grocery store and we were just getting started. We kept all of our prices stagnant for a whole year because we were trying to get off the ground. Right. So when we first start, this is how it's going to look because our end date, we don't know when it's going to end. Right. So that's how it'll be. And our query will pull the most, the price that's active. So, if we go to the cash register, it's going to pull these prices. But let's say we want to change, and let's say today we want to change our price on our bread lover's white loaf, because that's on my item ID 1. So we would end date it, and well, and technically tomorrow the sale would start. So item 1, and the price is going to go to 250, and it starts on the 19th. Right? Because that way there's no overlap. It ends on the 218 at midnight, and it starts 219 tomorrow at midnight. So that's how we would do that. Now, so you would have your historical record, and pretty soon this would be a long chain. But then you could effectively track prices for every item, and also you could refer that back to your price on your transaction. So then if they bought this one then, or bought this one here. Now that's one way to do it, is you could link to your price table, or you could just have a date and a price in here. And this is where design and other business demands come into play. Because let's say that they bought this one on January 15th, 2020. But they bought this one and what did I do? Say they bought this one today. Well, and those would both be the same. So let's say that they bought this on the 20th. We're going to pretend like we're in the future, right? So we could just leave, you could put the price there. There's lots of flexibility in this regard. But then what we could do is, just based on this data, we could then say, okay, they purchased item 1 on 115. So where does that fall in? Is 115 between the start date and end date for item, and that's our price. So on 115, 2020, it falls between 218, 218.20. So we know that price would apply there, versus this one would fall between 220 and null, but we would do our little is null trick, and it would be a price of $2.50. And so David asks, if you know it's going to be a temporary sale and then revert back to the old price after the sale ends, can you organize the data without entering an end date for the original price and pre-enter an end date for the sale price so it would revert back automatically? And yeah, there are, like I said, and this all comes down to however you design your database, right? So in this case, we just have generic prices. But you could have your price table like this, but then you could also have a sale table. But then obviously you would want to take care of the sale data, in other ways, probably on your POS system or server side, and stuff like that. It does add a level of complexity. But those are all things that when you're designing the database, you have to take into consideration. Because, but for example, we all know that a lot of grocery stores, there's those deals where, oh, if you buy 2, you get 50% off, right? And so those are conditional type things, to where, you would probably want to build a sale table, with something like, so let's do a sale ID. We could have a min quantity field, and I don't know why it does that. A minimum quantity and discount. So, something like that, where it because and we need an item. Let's call this item ID, and then we'll move sale ID over here. So, and this is, just off the cuff, this is what I would do. My initial thought to explore would be something like this, where, I have a sale, and then I can have the item and a minimum quantity, and that minimum quantity may just be 1, right? If we're having a sale. And then rather than change the price, we apply a discount, right? So then let's say for bread, it's buy two and you get 50 cents off or something, like, you could do a discount, and however you want to design it, if you automatically assume that these are going to be subtracted, then you can just put those positive. But this is something that I would do where you have like your sale ID, you have an item, min quantity, and then you would also have your start date and your end date. That's a good question. And that's actually the first time I've actually ever had that asked. The first time I've actually ever thought about it. So, but this is how I would do it: is I would put a sale there, and then rather than adjust your price and have lots of prices, um, I would have a sale table. But what's nice is with price, you could still keep your original design here, because let's say we all know that base prices change, right? We've seen it happen time and time again, especially with goods like cheese and milk and that kind of stuff. And so what's nice is you can change the default price independently of sales that you might run as an organization. Because then that way that opens up a whole lot of more doors for reports, such as, okay, what is the average cost of our cereals from the manufacturers? Or what is our profit without sales? That sort of thing. So that's how I would kind of manage that. But just so you know, what we're going to do is inside of our design for our movies, right? What we're going to do is we are going to have um, an additional field that is almost purely utilitarian, because we're going to have a start date and an end date already, but we're going to add one column to make life easier for us when we query, and that is active flag. So let's change our dates here, and let's change this from 02 to 01. Yeah, that'll work. Right. So we added some products. Now, active flag, what it's going to do is it's going to tell us what prices are currently active. So, and on this one, we're going to future date this one. I'm going to say 0225 2020. So in this case, let's say that all these prices are working, except this one's going to end because that's item ID 1. So that one's going to end. Let's make that today. Let's make it yesterday. All right, so our active flag, basically what we're going to do is we're going to build it like this. That would be a no, yes, yes, and yes. And so that way, when we query, we can say, oh, for item ID, let's say the person comes up to the cash register and they scan it and it's the item 2. We're going to say, okay, get the price from price table for item 2 where active flag is equal to yes. And so $2. In the case of item ID 1, let's say that they scan the next one and it's a white loaf of bread lovers. It's going to come here and it's going to say, okay, get the price ID, get the price from price where active flag is equal to yes and the item ID is equal to 1. Well, it's going to hit here, but active flag is no, so we're going to get 2.5 versus 3. Does that make sense, everybody? We're going to basically track which price is the active price that we're actively selling for. If that doesn't make sense, let me know. So that's what we're going to do. And but we're going to be doing it with movies, but it's almost going to be the same principle. The only difference is that we are kind of doing this retroactively, because as you guys know, we already have movies in our database, correct? We already have a bunch of items. And I'm going to steal this. All right, we already have a bunch of items. And I'm going to just put some in here real quick. You guys will get what I'm saying. I don't know why it's been doing that lately. It's so weird. Anyways, we're going to be doing this with movies, and a big part because we don't have any of our prices, right? But our big criteria for determining what prices we charge movies for is if the movie is new or old. And that is all based on the release date. Right? And like I said, I do not know why it's been doing that lately. It's the darndest thing. Okay. I didn't want item release. I want release date. So like Hunt for the Red October, let's say it came out in the 1st of or January 7th, 1993. The Fellowship of the Ring, I'm trying to think when it came out. Let's just say June 15th of 2003. And let's say Tron came out in September 14th of 2006. Just throwing those out there. And so, well, we need to add a few new movies. So, Ford versus Ferrari, and let's do Spies in Disguise. Right, and the release date is talking about when they hit DVD, and we're going to pretend that these are already out. So we're going to just say that they both came out today. We're going to pretend. So there's our movies. Now, essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to build our price table. So we're going to have a price ID, item ID, price, start date, end date, and let's do active flag. Something like this. Let's put some numbers in here. Oops. All right. So if we were going to try to determine, and we already actually know our pricing scheme, right? So for old, we have so we have a 1, a 3, and a 5-day rental. For old movies, it's pretty much $1 a day. So 1, 3, and 5. But this one goes 3, 5, 10. So these are our prices for old and new movies based on the number of days that we rent them. Let's change this to money so we can all know that that makes sense. So we know our price, but what we need to do is we need to figure all of our prices for all of our existing movies. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to build all the possible prices for every one of our movies. And we're going to do that with a cross join, which we'll talk about. But yeah, so essentially when we cross join this, because we know for every movie, there is going to be, well, we're actually going to do 2 cross joins. We're going to take item and we're going to cross it with 1, 3, and 5 for the number of days. And then we're going to also cross that with active flag of yes and no. And this is kind of that little trick that I was telling you about, because if we want to come up, like in this case, we want any combination is possible. For example, Hunt for the Red October, Um, it's currently an old movie, but we also want to have its prices for when it was new. Now, granted, we're never going to use them, but we want them even if they're new. And then we can actually exclude those later if we want, but we're going to build them all out. So Hunt for the Red October, um, the active flag tells us if it's currently active or not. And so we're going to multiply by those. But first, we want to multiply by the number of days. So we take Hunt for the Red October and we multiply that by 1, 3, and 5. So then all of a sudden we have item ID 1, 2, 1, 3, 5. And then, yep, so 1, 3, and 5. An active flag, because remember, we're multiplying this by these. So to get every combination, we're having Hunt for the Red October, 1, 3, 5. You know, we really should put let's do this. I forgot to have one column. So let's put a days in here. So we multiply it by 1, 3, and 5. And we multiply them by active flags. So then we get a yes. And then because we're multiplying to get every possible combination, we're actually going to end up with something that looks like this. Now we know that our price for, and then from here we can determine our price and our start date, right? Because this is where we're going to do some logic. Because now that we have the structure for one of our movies, right? Because this is all Hunt for the Red October. Now we're going to build out our price and our start date, and it's all dependent upon the release date. So we would say something like this. Well, if it's an old movie, right? Because we're trying to fill in price and start date and end date. So we're going to say, okay, if the release date of item 1 is older, if it's an old movie, right? If it's an old movie and the active flag is yes, then we're charging the current prices, which is the old movie prices. So then we can fill in the old movie prices. Does that make sense to everybody? Because we're going to write this logic here in a minute. So if it's an old movie and the active flag is yes, then we know that we can charge the current prices, which are the legit old prices. And then furthermore, we can determine the start date and end date because obviously it would start on its release date. So we are just going to take and put the item release date in the start date. Oh, whoops. Sorry. I lied. I'm getting ahead of myself. We know that we started charging these active flag prices. It is equal to, and I'm actually going to write this equation in here, right? So it is equal to the release date plus 31. Because we charge for a movie 30 days after its release, it's a new movie. Then after, it's considered old. And we're going to do that again. So we're going to say the start date is equal to the release date of the movie plus 31 days. And it looks just like that. And that's pretty much exactly what we're going to do inside of our code is we're going to make it so it just knows to put plus 31 days if it's an old movie and the active flag is yes. Now the end date will stay null because we are going to charge for this movie until the end of time. Until we actually throw it in the bin. Which if you're a movie rental, like unless your DVDs all wear out, and you're probably going to put it in there, or it's a sad day and streaming platforms take over and we never sell another movie again in our life. But so our end date stays there. But now let's fill out the rest of it. So if the movie is old and active flag is equal to no, then we know we're charging the movies that used to be. We're going back to the glory days of Hunt for the Red October when it was brand new. So we know that they're no longer active, so we're charging the new movie prices is what we would have charged back in the day, 3, 5, and 10. And the start date would actually just be the release date of the movie because that's when it came out. So that's when we're going to start charging for that. And then we can also calculate the end date because the end date is just going to be 30 days past the release date of the movie. So in this case, we're going to say this is equal to the release date plus 30. Right? And there we go. So that's one movie. Now you can see because if we had one item in item and then 3 times 2, what's 1 times 3 times 2? Well, it's 6. And how many records do we have? 6. So we did good. And we're going to do good just a little bit more because now we're going to go over what a new movie looks like. Because let's say Ford versus Ferrari, right? We're going to do that. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to take Ford versus Ferrari, times it by the number of days, and then times it by the active flag. So let's start by timesing it by the days for the first one, and the active flag, yes. So Ford versus Ferrari, 135, yes. 135, and yes, yes, yes. And then we're going to do it for no. So we have 135 again. And no, no, no. All right. And then we're going to do the same logic, but this time, instead of saying if it's an old movie, this time we're going to do we're going to still say if it's an old movie, but now we're going to deal with the false clause of that, the else, right? So we're going to come in here and we're going to say, okay, if the movie is greater than 31 days old, if the release date is greater than 31 days past today, that's how we know if it's an old movie. And the answer is it is not. So then we skip what we did here and we go to an else clause. And in this else clause, so if it's an old movie and the active flag is yes, then we do this. Else, if it's a new movie, what are we going to do? Well, we are going to, and the active flag is yes, then we're charging these new movie prices. So that means that this would be a 3, 5, and a 10. And the start date would be equal to the release date of the movie. So Ford versus Ferrari came out on this day. Now, we're going to be smart, and we're actually going to predate these if we wanted to. And I can't remember if they predate these in the lab or not, but we're going to do it here. So the end date would then simply be the release date plus 30. Whoops. There we go. And then if it's a new movie and active flag is no, then we know we're pre-inserting our old movie prices. And so we're going to do that easy because then we have all of our prices for all of our movies. And the start date would be, does anyone have a guess what the start date would be? What number should I type here? Item release date plus. Perfect. Plus 31. And it wouldn't actually be sys date. It would actually be the release date. Because if we did it from today, that would forever be changing. Oops. What did I do here? No. Stop. Stop. No. Oh, I did it again. I keep pushing control. This is equal to Ford versus Ferrari release date plus 31 because 31 days after it comes out, it becomes an old movie. And its end dates would stay empty. So you can see how really these end up being the same. You know, they're kind of a little out of order right now, but eventually they pretty much end up looking the same. And because the only thing that's going to change, so let's zip into the future, right? Let's zip into the future and say that it's now 3/20 of this year. So it's March 30th. Um, these are all going to change to no. And these are all going to change to yes, right? So we keep on, as dates change, we're going to update the active flag, but the rest will stay the same. And you can see how we just very quickly changed our prices by adjusting the active flag. Now, if it were me building this database, I probably wouldn't do an active flag. I would leave it off and just do all of it based on the dates, but they chose to do an active flag, and there is reason for it. And the reason being is that you can very quickly query um, the latest price. And someone asked, do you have to do that manually? And the answer is kind of yes, and kind of no. So in the future, I don't think it's in this one. Actually, no, I think we do build it in this one. We actually build a procedure. And a procedure is a script that runs that can be called, and it will do us for us. And that script would just run nightly. Yep. So, yep, that script would run daily, and that's why I say I would just leave this off, because then you don't have to worry about that script, right? If this is gone, we write our query to just say, look, wherever today is or whatever the date of purchase was, if it falls between the start date and the end date, that's the price you do, right? So that's how I would do it. But for whatever reason, in this design, they have this active flag. And honestly, it may just be to make it easier to see, because we are learning. If this was production, maybe they would have left it out, but we are just learning. And it does make it easy to see what the active price is. So like if, for example, if I came to the cash register and I said, okay, I want um, item ID 1, which is Hunt for the Red October, and I'm going to rent it for 3 days. You say, okay, item ID 1 and active flag is yes, and then days is equal to 3. Boom, there's your price, $3, right? So essentially that's what we're going to do. Does that make sense to everybody? I know we spent a lot of time going over this, and like we didn't even really talk about SQL and stuff, but I think it will help make a lot of sense when you actually get to it, which is, I think, one of the biggest struggles with this lab is if you don't understand what you're trying to do, it makes it really, really hard to do it. So, and I'm not going to talk too much about this actually, because when I share this video, I have a great video that actually goes step by step through all this. So I'm not going to actually go over every tiny, minute detail, but I do want to just talk about and point what we just talked about and kind of draw arrows to the instructions here. Sorry, my printer just decided to print something. So anyways, step 1 is we insert 2 new rows into common lookup that support the active flag column. And so here you can see that we put our yes and no in there. And that's what we're going to use for our flag wherever, right here, right? Because we just typed it in there, but here we're actually going to link to it. And then here in step 2, we insert 3 new rows into common lookup, and this is going to be our price type and our rental item type, because we have our prices just like we went over of 1, 3, and 5. But then also for rental item, we have a 1, 3, and a 5 for those. So basically we're going to put 1, 3, and 5 in our common lookup table so that we can track the number of days without someone accidentally putting a 4 in, for the number of days. And then that way, like if you're doing a rental, as far as like, let's say you're Amazon, they have a common lookup table or similar so that when you do the little drop down to say, oh, I want to rent this, click the drop down for 3 days, only those items show up in the list. And that's because they're pulling it from their common lookup table. Our common lookup table is built for drop down menus. And so I guess just as another tidbit, if you ever go to a database interview and you do a common lookup table, they're going to be happy, because it really is a thing that is hard for people to get unless you know what you're doing. And a lot of people, instead of building a common lookup table, they'll like just build a price type table instead of that. But it's all just up to however you decide to design it, because if you built a price type table, you might only have 3 records in it, and that's a lot of overhead for 3 records. So thus the common lookup table. All right, and then step 3, we add the rental item price and rental item. We added these columns in a previous lab, and now we're going to update those. So this is, I kind of wanted to come over, and it says update rental item type. Notice it says you cannot populate rental item price until you get to lab 8, but we're going to update rental item type with values for all pre-existing rows, because we actually already have those rows there. Now this shows you how to update the existing rows with proper values from common lookup table, but it may have a casting error in Oracle database 10G and earlier. If you fix the casting error, it will work like a charm. Well, lucky for you guys, we are on Oracle database 11G, which means that we don't have to worry about this. And the casting error is right here, just so you know. Prior to Oracle, well, in Oracle 10G and earlier, it was not smart enough to know that if you said return date minus checkout date, it would actually return a date. But in this case, it's actually going to return a number. So let's say that you returned it 3 days after your checkout date. Well, that would return a 3. So that means it was a 3-day rental, which our common lookup code is going to be equal to 3. And so it sets the type. So basically what we're doing is for all pre-existing rentals, we're saying, okay, how long did you rent the movie for? Because that's what we're going to set you as in this 1, 3, and 5 for rental item type. Does that make sense to everybody? What we're going to do there, we're going to just take the number of days they had a movie checked out and set that equal to the rental item type column. Well, common lookup, then to rental item type. Okay. And so that one's actually a freebie because the answer is literally right there. You paste that in and run it. And then we update it because right now it's nullable because it's empty. And then we put a not null constraint on it, which we've done that before as well. So nothing new there. But step 4 is where we do the magic. And that's where we're going to write this big complicated query that does it. Now they kind of give you the start here, right? So they give you this. And this is the structure of what we're going to be doing here. And you'll notice that we have item I, and then we cross join yes and no, just like we did in our spreadsheet, right? We take item, we cross joined it, multiplied it by yes and no, and then we multiply that by 1, 3, and 5, right? 1, 3, and 5. And that's how we got our table down here. Well, that's going to be the structure of this. So they've actually already got the cross join built for you. So all you have to do is implement some logic, is what we're going to talk about right now, some case statements. And a case statement is essentially an if clause. If you're used to programming, it's a way for us to perform logic, to make decisions. So let's do this. Let's say select everything from contact. Right, here we have our contacts, and let's fix this. Let's set line size equal to 200. and query contact again. All right, so here we have our contact table. Well, let's say just to show off this case statement, we're going to say if your middle name is null, then we're going to select your last name, first name, and then if your middle name is null, we're going to put a warning on you, okay? Because let's say we want to make sure that everyone has a middle name for whatever reason. So we're going to say select, and we're going to say we want your first name, your last name, and then we're going to do case, right? Because we're going to say if middle name is null. Oh, we're going to say case. Sorry, I missed one keyword. And then we're going to say when middle name is null. And then we can put like our outcome. So we're going to say when middle name is null, then warning. Let's put warning. And then also, let's say when last name, because let's say that we had a bunch of wins work for us and they were terrible. We're going to say when last name is equal to win, then do not hire. Else end as instruction from contact. Let's see if we got it. And there we go. So you can see we did, and let's see, something didn't work right. Oh, and that's because both their middle names were null. So let's try that again. I really should have pasted that. Let's do this. Let's open up a file here and make our lives a little easier. So let's talk about this because we were probably, I mean, I was expecting at least a couple do not hires, right? Because basically what we did here is we said case, and let me format this so it makes a little bit more sense. And then we have our if statements, and then our else, and then we have our end as instruction. So what this did is it said, okay, case. That means we're going to make some logic here. And then we say, when middle name is null, then warning. When last name is equal to win, then do not hire, which we don't have any of those, and then else no issues. And the reason we didn't get do not hire is because their names were null, their middle name is null. It already returned after the first one. But if we were to fix this and put it in the correct order here of operation of importance, because we really just do not want to hire those win characters. Let's put them in here like this. And there we go. Now we get do not hire, and then that goes. Because this works just like, if you're familiar with programming, it works just like an if statement, right? So we're going to say if last name is equal to win, print do not hire. Else if So if you're familiar with another programming language, this is the exact equivalent of what we're doing there. So it's going to come through here and it's going to say if last name is equal to when, print do not hire. And you know that in this, in traditional languages, as soon as it hits an if clause, it's going to bounce out and skip the rest of this because it says else if, right? So that's essentially what it's going to do. Is so it's going to check, and as soon as it hits it, it's going to execute the command in there and skip down to here. So in this case, for the wins, the first time we had that where it was reversed, it would fire on the middle name and it printed warning and it went down. But since we switched it, like in the case of win, it's going to hit here. Oh, yep, the last name is equal to win, print do not here as a new column called instruction. So that's why we get it as a column there. And then it moves on. And so on and so forth. Now, what we could do is we could add more here. So we can do an embedded case statement. So when middle name is null, then let's do another case. And then we're going to say when last name is equal to Potter, because the Potter can get away with anything, right? You know, and I don't know why their middle name matters, but we're going to say so. This is a really biased business. And does Smith have a middle name? Yes, the one Smith does have a middle name. So let's pick someone else. Sweeney. Now, because we're not ending as a column, right? Because we're kind of building this as an embedded case statement because we already end as instruction here. We just put end. So we don't need to put end as because this is all going to end up in instruction anyways. So let's put that in here. Oh, and you'll notice that now we have an issue here because we have some untaken care of clauses. So you'll notice now that for our Sweeneys, we get do not hire, but we missed a piece of logic because you'll notice these are blank because we didn't put an else statement in here. All right, let's put warning here. Right, because we forgot to put our else block to handle all the cases that weren't handled else. And there we go. Now we get all of our stuff. So there's a little example of if statements and how those work. And I would recommend playing with those a little bit because just like we did in our logic on our here, we had to do our if statements, right? And so we would probably put something along the lines of, you know, let's select i.item ID. Well, you know what? Let's do this. Let's actually grab our little start of our code here. All right, so here's the start of our code, and I'm going to delete this stuff that we haven't done yet. And let's build our amounts. Well, you know, let's do that. Yeah, it doesn't matter too much. So we're going to say case when, because if this is our start date, right? And this is kind of where you got to, and we actually did it all. So if you go back and watch, you know, let's do the prices real quick. Let's leave that there. So we're going to say when i.release date is greater than, oh, and we need to do, let's do this. Let's say trunk sysdate minus i.release date is greater than 30. And then we would go through our stuff. Now, in this case, this is where we're going to have our embedded one, because if it's an old movie, remember, this is our price. We then have an additional thing. And then we say case. Let's do this, embed that. We're going to say when dr.rental days is equal to 1. And remember, this is an old movie. Then the price would be 1 when dr.rental days is equal to 2 or 3, then 3 when dr.rental days is equal to 5, then 5. You know, and obviously you'd want to build in your active flag and stuff too. So like, for example, on this, when it's an old movie and what do they call that? AF dot active flag is equal to no, or to yes. So if it's an old movie and it's active, then these are the prices. All right. Oh. I don't think that indented properly. There we go. And then we say when trunk sysdate minus I dot release date, because we can say when it's an old movie is greater than 30. What did I do? Is greater than 30 and the active flag is equal to no, then it's a new movie. But you know, there's lots of different ways you can go about doing this, but you get the idea with the logic. You just want to make sure your prices are accurate. And like I said, I have another video out there that covers this, so I didn't want to go too in depth right now. But does this make sense to everybody? Not necessarily you can go out and do it immediately, but do you get a kind of how you would go about starting this? Because really what I would say is don't get too flustered and just take this one step at a time. Say, okay, you know, and maybe I'll even send out this spreadsheet, or you can come back and watch this or whatever. But, you know, you want to build this. I'll probably just send this out because it wouldn't do any good to have it pre-filled. But you want to build it so you can come up with the same logic on your own just in here. So you want to make sure that all your stuff is filled and that it works. And really, aside from this step, this lab is super easy. So you should have a lot of time to kind of focus on this guy right here. All right. I will post the link to my other video when I share the link to this recording. Good question. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Real quick, I guess. You guys noticed how I put DR right here for our rental days? And I just, you know, I get that from right down here. Because this, it's like if I took this query right here, pasted it in here, we get our 1, 3, and 5. So essentially what he's doing is he's taking this select statement and he's calling it DR like a table. So now it's like there's a table named DR. Same thing with our active flag. We just take this query and this is our table. Oh, and I must not have copied and pasted all of it. If you remember right, I said that's where that dual table really comes in handy. So there's our active flag and it's called AF. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Like I said, I think this is something that, like I said, and I hope it was helpful to understand the logic behind it. Because if you understand the logic behind it and then understand a case statement, this really, I mean, it looks complex, but at each little component, it's actually quite simple. Thoughts from anyone before we go? It's awfully quiet. Going once, going twice. Okay, so it sounds like everyone's good. So I'm gonna leave you there with that, and I'll post that other video as well that should provide additional insight should you need it. Um, but yeah, thanks for coming. Um, thanks for sticking out with me. I know we kind of get really basic and reiterate over the same things a few times, but hopefully it's helpful. And yeah, good luck this week.